Well, it's something we've talked a lot about on this show, cancel culture. We've been seeing brands like Goya get called on to be canceled, journalists get fired from places like the New York Times, and famous bands changing their names, and products like Aunt Jemima get pulled from shelves, and even shows like Cops and Live PD get pulled from the airwaves. We've talked a lot about how cancel culture has gone too far. And a recent survey actually showed, done by Politico, that most of Americans agree. 46% of Americans believe that cancel culture has gone too far. About 26% of people said they didn't know or they didn't care. So why does it continue? Let's bring in our company to discuss. Here with us now is conservative commentator Elisha Krauss and former special assistant to President Trump, Kelly Sadler. Ladies, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
All right, well, I was kind of relieved when I saw this poll because I was like, all right, finally, people are agreeing a little bit. But something else that the poll showed that I thought was really interesting, it said 53% of people agreed that free speech is something that is protected in our Constitution, yet people should expect to be publicly harassed if they say something that's unpopular. Elisha, it seems like people want to cancel culture, but they also want to harass people at the same time.
Yeah, and I think that we see a double-sided nature of this issue when it comes to both sides of the aisle. And I think that this is something that conservatives have often addressed. I talk about the importance of free speech and the freedom to offend on college campuses when they're open all of the time. And this is something that I think people need to understand, that there are certain people that are politicians or in the public light that kind of put themselves out there, and they can be voted in and out of office. And I think we have every right as citizens to criticize them publicly and privately. But then there's somebody like, oh, I don't know, your husband or your in-laws or your best friend. And if you disagree with them politically, maybe you should have the cojones to talk to them one-on-one about it before, taking to a mommy chat blog or Facebook to gripe about them in public and try to get them canceled.
Yeah, that's a point. Good point. And Kelly, I think something else is interesting. This poll showed that it's mostly young people ages 18 to 34. And I kind of wonder, is it just because they haven't had enough life experience to make enough mistakes themselves to realize that we should be forgiving people for some of these things?
Well, they're also coming right out of college, and they've been brainwashed in a lot of these liberal universities. We've had professors get canceled at, Ivy League institutions for holding views that were different than, what the liberal mainstream is. And student activists go and say, I'm not going to take your courses or your classes anymore. There really isn't any freedom of thought that's happening at many of these Ivy League schools, unfortunately. And so the kids they come out of these schools thinking that there's just one correct way of thought, and then they don't like to be challenged moving ahead. And that's just what real life is, unfortunately.
Right. So generational too, like you pointed out. I call myself a grandma millennial. I'm 34, but there has been a lot of our generation that everything is digital, everything is online, every single thought that we have should be projected for the world to see and feel and understand, and it comes more down to how they feel about something than the actual principle of the thing. And I think it also shows, there was recent polling that shows that I think 2/3 of American youth don't even understand our founding principles. And when that isn't being taught in school, of course, they're going to have a skewed view of justice and righteousness.
Yeah, Alicia, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's fascinating. Derek Hunter writes a lot about this in his book. He's on the show quite often, Outrage, where people react before they even know what they're saying or doing. We did this a lot with Covington Catholic kids, where people saw a clip and they immediately denounced them before actually waiting to see the entirety of what happened. And it's so funny how it's like judge first, find out later. But Kelly, the thing that I think is interesting is that it's gone now to an entirely new level. We talk about cancel culture, and Lindsay mentioned a lot of these things that are getting canceled. But I never thought I'd see it this far. Massachusetts Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley just wants to cancel everything. Check out this tweet that she sent out. Cancel rent, cancel mortgage, cancel student debt. I mean, I don't, at some point like that, I wanted to tweet back, but I'm sure it would have created a whole storm. Like, you get a car, you get a car. It sounds like something that Oprah would say. But we've now gotten rid of any sense of personal responsibility. We've gone from holding people totally accountable for everything that they say to then saying, but then we're not going to hold you accountable for any of the debts that you have.
Yeah, and Representative Priestley, along with Rashida Tlaib, have come out with this Breathe Act, which cancels the police, it defunds the police, it cancels all federal prisons, wants all federal prisons to be closed, supports reparations. She is to the radical left of the Democratic Party, but it shows you kind of some of the fundamental values that they have. They want to tear down our country as it ends, and then produce something new. And it's really scary when you look at some of the proposals that she's put forth as a congresswoman. I mean, she just had an op-ed the other day in CNBC saying that the Federal Reserve needed to change and it needed to incorporate social justice and monitor corporations and companies that aren't hiring enough African Americans or minorities, then punish them for that. Well, that's not a part of the Federal Reserve's mandate, but this is her fundamental beliefs.
Yeah, and Elisha, like you were saying, it's age here a lot of times. I think whenever time you're trying to have someone mature, you give them responsibility. You don't take it away and say, oh, you don't have to pay anything now. You're supposed to give them responsibility to teach them some maturity in ways. We only have about a minute left.
Yeah, I think that I've been researching homeschooling because our idiotic governor here in Newsom has told me that my children's religious private school can't reopen. And a part of the homeschool curriculum I'm looking into says that every single day your kids should do something that they love, something that educates them, and something that requires work. And I think too many of the millennial generation and younger don't get to do those kinds of things every day. And if they don't work for themselves, then they don't have that self-preservation and self-level of independence to understand that they need the responsibility, and that responsibility is good, not only for them as individuals, but for society.
Ladies,
I love that. That's fantastic.
That's great. This is a great discussion. Always love having you here and look forward to having you again soon.
Thanks.
All right. Well, have you heard of the Trump virus? Nancy Pelosi has, and we're going to discuss these crazy claims from the Speaker of the House with friend of the show, Trish Regan. Don't go away.